My wife and I went out to dinner with my son and his wife on Mother's Day. When the waiter came over, my daughter-in-law quietly said, "We're not paying for her," and my son simply nodded. I didn't argue or embarrass anyone. I just kept eating. Then the bill arrived, and the restaurant manager walked over and said one sentence that made both of their expressions change instantly. "We're not paying for her." Lauren said it to the waiter, not to us. Loud enough that the couple at the next table stopped talking. Loud enough that a busboy 2 stations over slowed down with a tray of water glasses, unsure whether he'd walked into something. She meant my wife. Helen's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down slow, like sudden movement might make it worse. 41 years married to that woman, and I had never seen her go that still. Not at her mother's funeral. Not the year the market took our second development, and we sat in a lawyer's office watching our net worth cut in half on a whiteboard. Still, and small, and blinking like she was waiting for someone to tell her it was a joke. Michael, my son, 34 years old, a grown man who used to cry when his mother left the room too long as a toddler, looked at his plate, looked at the salmon he hadn't finished, looked at anything that wasn't his mother's face. Then he nodded. I want to be precise about that nod because I've replayed it more times than I can count since. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't a man caught off guard buying time to figure out how to fix what his wife had just done. It was agreement. Small, quick, final. The kind of nod you give when a decision has already been made somewhere off camera and you're just confirming it in front of witnesses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push my chair back. I didn't do any of the things a man is supposed to do when his wife gets humiliated at a table he's sitting at. I smiled. I picked my fork back up, and I reached, very casually, into my jacket pocket, where a folder had been sitting since 4:15 that afternoon, waiting. Because by the time we sat down at that restaurant, I already knew something neither Lauren nor Michael did. I knew exactly how much money was missing. I knew exactly whose signature had been on the withdrawal slips. And I knew, within about 11 minutes of watching my daughter-in-law order a second glass of wine she didn't need, that tonight was going to be the night I stopped waiting. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that happened 3 weeks earlier, in an office with the blinds down, staring at a bank statement until the numbers stopped looking like numbers at all. I'm 68 years old. I spent 38 of those years in commercial real estate, mostly on the acquisition side, the part of the business where you learn, fast and permanently, that anyone can smile at you across a table while quietly restructuring a deal to bleed you dry. You learn to read a signature. You learn to read a pause before someone answers a question they didn't expect. You learn that the person who volunteers to handle the paperwork so you don't have to worry about it is either the most generous person in the room or the most dangerous one, and there is rarely a comfortable way to find out which before it's too late. I retired 4 years ago. Helen, my wife, is 66. She taught middle school choir for 31 years, which, if you've never met a woman who spent 3 decades wrangling adolescent altos, means she is patient in a way I have never managed to be, and trusting in a way that used to worry me before I understood it wasn't naivety, it was generosity. She believed people were basically decent because she'd spent her whole career choosing to believe it about 13-year-olds, and it had mostly worked out. Michael is our only child. Lauren, his wife, came into the family 6 years ago. Smart, sharp dresser, worked in wealth consulting, which she explained to us once at a barbecue in a way that made it sound both extremely important and impossible to summarize. She was polite to us, attentive even. She remembered Helen's birthday without being reminded, which is more than I can say for some blood relatives. About a year ago, Lauren offered to help Helen set up online banking. It came up naturally. Helen mentioned struggling with the mobile app for her savings account, the one at Meridian Trust she'd kept separate from our joint accounts since before we were married, a habit from her mother that neither of us ever questioned. Lauren said she did this kind of thing for clients all the time, offered to walk her through it, set up the login, the 2-factor authentication, showed her how to check her balance from her phone. She's so patient with me, Helen told me afterward. Not everybody has the patience to explain that stuff to an old lady. I remember smiling and saying something about how Lauren was good with details. I remember not thinking about it again for months. That's the part that still gets me. Not the money, the months. There were small things, if I'm honest, that I noticed and let go. Lauren asking more than once whether Helen's account was still separate from ours, framed as idle curiosity, the kind of question you ask about someone's coffee order. Lauren offering, unprompted, to just handle the paperwork when Helen's bank sent a letter about updating beneficiary information. Lauren's slight impatience, barely a flicker, gone almost as fast as it appeared. Whenever Helen mentioned wanting to check something herself, I filed those away as nothing. Personality, efficiency, the way some people just like being useful. I was wrong, and it took a 41-year-old woman mentioning a missing $6,000 over a phone call, almost as an afterthought, for me to start being wrong out loud instead of quietly. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Helen had choir alumni practice that night. She still directs a community group of former students, a little Tuesday evening tradition that's outlasted her actual teaching career. And she called me from the car afterward, half laughing, half annoyed. "Something's off with my account," she said. "There's a transfer I don't remember making. $6,000 back in February. I must have fat-fingered something in the app." "You don't fat-finger $6,000, Helen." "Well, I don't know what else it would be. I'll ask Lauren to look at it when we see them." I told myself it was probably nothing. A recurring transfer to a savings vehicle she'd forgotten setting up, a misremembered number. Helen was many wonderful things, but precise about her own banking app was not not historically one of them, and I didn't want to be the husband who turned every small confusion into an investigation. I told myself that for about 6 hours. Then I couldn't sleep, went down to my office a little after midnight, and pulled up the joint account portal, which, because Helen's Meridian Trust account had once been linked to our shared financial advisor's dashboard years ago for tax purposes, I still technically had limited read access to, a fact I'm fairly certain Lauren didn't know when she set up the new online banking credentials. I found the February transfer in about 4 minutes. Then I found 3 more. Not one transfer, 4, spread across 5 months. February, March, a gap, then 2 in a 14-day stretch in April that made my stomach drop, the way ice water does when you're not expecting it. Individually, none of them looked catastrophic. 4,000 here, 7 there, small enough, spaced out enough that Helen, who checked her balance maybe once a month, generally to make sure a subscription hadn't overcharged her, would never have noticed unless something specifically flagged it for her. Added together, they came to just under $31,000. All 4 routed to the same external account, an account that had been added to Helen's profile as an authorized transfer destination, back when Lauren first set up the online banking. An account with a name on it that wasn't Helen's and wasn't Michael's and wasn't anyone I recognized. I sat there in my office chair at nearly 1 in the morning with the laptop screen too bright in the dark room, and I did the thing 38 years in commercial real estate trained into me before I let myself feel anything about it. I got quiet and I got methodical. I didn't wake Helen up. I didn't call Michael. I opened a blank document and started writing down dates, amounts, and account numbers, the exact way I used to build a due diligence file before we closed on a piece of property. Because if there's one thing that job teaches you, it's that panic destroys evidence and patience preserves it. Then I looked at the signature on the transfer authorization forms. It was close enough that at a glance, in bad lighting, in a hurry, you'd believe it was Helen's. The loop on the H was slightly too tight. The final flourish under her last name, a habit she'd had since I met her in 1979, a little downward tail she does without thinking, was missing on all 4 forms, missing in exactly the same way, every single time. My hands were shaking by the time I closed the laptop. I don't shake. 40 years of negotiating 7-figure deals with men who'd happily eat your lunch if you flinched, and I don't shake. I did that night. I told myself, sitting there at 1 in the morning, that I could be wrong about the signature. Handwriting drifts. People sign things in a hurry in a bank lobby with a stylus that doesn't track right, and the result looks nothing like their real signature. I've seen my own name come out looking like a stranger wrote it on those little screens at the DMV, so I didn't say anything to Helen. Not yet. I told myself I needed to be sure before I said anything that might break her heart over what could still turn out to be an honest mistake. I called Raymond Ostrander the next morning. Ray and I had worked together 20-some years earlier on a fraud case involving a property manager who'd been forging tenant signatures on lease renewals to pocket security deposits. He was the forensic document examiner our attorney brought in, and he'd been sharp, discreet, and unbothered by the kind of ugly family-adjacent messes that make most people squeamish. 22 years as a certified forensic document examiner, the last 11 running his own practice out of a strip mall office that looked more like an insurance agency than anything you'd associate with solving fraud. Bring me the originals if you can get them, and at least a dozen known exemplars of her real signature, he told me over the phone. Cards, checks, anything with a natural, unhurried signing, the more the better. I spent the better part of that day being a person I didn't love being, going through old greeting cards Helen had signed, a stack of canceled checks from a filing cabinet, a birthday card she'd written to Michael 8 years ago that I photographed instead of asking her why I needed it. I told her I was organizing old tax documents. She believed me, because 39 years of marriage means she has no particular reason not to. Ray called me 4 days later. I remember exactly where I was standing, in the garage, because I hadn't been able to sit still in the house waiting for the phone to ring. It's forged, he said. No preamble, which I appreciated and also didn't. And it's not a one-time thing. Whoever did this traced or closely copied her signature and did it consistently across all 4 documents. Same pressure points, same hesitation marks in the same places every time. That's not someone dashing off a quick forgery under pressure. That's someone who practiced. That detail sat with me longer than the dollar amount did, if I'm honest. $31,000 is a number. It's bad, but it's a number, and numbers can theoretically be fixed. Practiced is a different thing. Practiced means sitting somewhere, alone, with a sample of my wife's handwriting, doing it over and over until it looked natural enough to pass. Practiced means intention, planning, time spent deliberately, figuring out how to take something from a woman who'd never given anyone a reason not to trust her. Can you put that in writing? I asked him. Something that would hold up. I can give you a full written report with my findings and credentials. If this goes anywhere formal, bank fraud department, law enforcement, it'll hold up fine. I've testified on less. I thanked him. I paid his invoice the same day, by check, because some habits from 38 years of due diligence don't leave you even when your hands are shaking again. Then I drove home, sat in the driveway for 11 minutes without going inside, and finally called the one person I trusted to tell me whether I was overreacting or underreacting, our attorney. Diane Kowalczyk had handled our estate planning and a handful of business matters for almost 15 years by that point, a partner at a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of lawyer who answers her own phone before 9 in the morning, because she genuinely genuinely likes getting ahead of a problem before it becomes a bigger one. I laid it out for her plainly. The transfers, the forged signature, Ray's report. She listened without interrupting, which I've come to understand is its own kind of professional courtesy, letting a client get the whole ugly thing out before responding. First, she said, you did the right thing getting a document examiner before saying anything to Helen or confronting anyone. That report is going to matter. Second, has anyone actually looked at what else is on that account? Not just the transfers out, everything. I hadn't. I'd been so locked onto the 4 withdrawals that I hadn't stepped back and looked at the whole picture, the way I'd have insisted a junior analyst do if they'd brought me half a due diligence file and called it finished. Diane referred me to a private forensic accountant her firm used for exactly this kind of situation. Priya Nair, CFE, a certified fraud examiner with, she told me over our first call, 16 years specializing in elder financial exploitation cases, which was a phrase I hadn't let myself use out loud yet, even in my own head. Priya asked for full statement history, not just the months I'd already flagged. She asked for the original account setup paperwork from when Lauren had walked Helen through opening online banking. And 3 days into her review, she found something I hadn't: a second account. Not a transfer destination, an actual second savings account, opened at Meridian Trust 11 months earlier, in Helen's name, using Helen's social security number, with a mailing address changed to a P.O. box instead of our house. Opened the same week Lauren had helped set up the online banking. Helen had no idea it existed. She'd certainly never requested statements be routed anywhere but home. It's not currently holding much, Priya told me on the phone, and I could hear her flipping papers on her end. About $4,000. But the structure is what worries me more than the balance. Someone set up an account in your wife's name, redirected the mail so she'd never see the statements, and has been using it as a staging account. Money moves through it before it goes anywhere external. That's not a mistake. That's a system somebody built. I asked her the question I'd been avoiding since the night I found the first transfer. Could my son have known about this? Priya was quiet for a second. I can tell you what the paperwork shows. I can't tell you what anyone knew. The account application lists Lauren's phone number as the contact number, not your son's. Beyond that, that's not something a bank statement can answer for you. I hung up the phone and sat in my office for a long time, staring at the wall, trying to decide which possibility scared me more, that my son had known, or that he hadn't noticed his own wife building a second identity for his mother's money right under both of us. Diane's advice was measured, and I understood why, even as it frustrated me. Don't confront Lauren directly yet, she said. Not until we've got the bank's fraud department engaged and a report filed. If she realizes she's been caught before there's an official record, she has time to explain it away, move money further, or worse, dig in and make Helen doubt what's actually in front of her. You want the documentation locked in first, then you act. So I called Meridian Trust's fraud department, and after 2 transfers and 1 hold that lasted 11 minutes, I got a case opened with a woman named Carol Ibsen, a fraud investigations specialist who'd been with the bank's internal security division for 9 years and who had the particular flat, unbothered voice of someone who has heard every version of this story and stopped being surprised by any of them. We'll need Mrs. Bellwether to file the initial dispute herself, since it's her account, Carol told me. I know that means you'll need to tell her what you found. I'm sorry. I know that's not an easy conversation. It wasn't. I want to be honest about that part, because I think it's the part people skip over when they imagine themselves as the person who catches the fraud and rides in with the folder. Before I ever got to sit across a dinner table from Lauren, I had to sit across my own kitchen table from Helen and tell her that her daughter-in-law, a woman she'd defended more than once when I'd made an offhand comment about her being a little too smooth for my taste, had likely been stealing from her for the better part of a year. Helen didn't cry right away. She went very quiet, the way she had at the restaurant weeks later, which I understand now was the first time I saw that particular stillness, and didn't yet know it was a warning sign of how deep this had actually cut her. She helped me with the app, Helen said finally. She sat with me for 2 hours showing me how to use it. Why would she stopped, started again. Are you sure? I showed her Ray's report. I showed her the signature comparison, page by page. The missing flourish under her own name repeated 4 times like a fingerprint someone had tried and failed to erase. I watched my wife of 39 years look at her own forged signature and go through something I have no adequate word for. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that once it arrived. Something closer to grief. The specific grief of realizing a kindness you extended was used as a door. She filed the dispute with Carol 2 days later. Formal, on record, dated, and time-stamped. Priya's forensic report went in alongside it. Ray's document examination went in alongside that. By the time all 3 were sitting in Carol's case file, we had, as Diane put it on our next call, a genuinely airtight paper trail, which is rarer than you'd think in these cases, and it's going to matter enormously for what happens next. What happens next was supposed to be quiet, formal. A bank freezing an account, opening its own investigation, possibly referring it to law enforcement once their internal review confirmed what our own documentation already showed. Diane's plan had never once involved a restaurant, or a Mother's Day reservation, or a folder crossing a white tablecloth in front of strangers. That part was Michael's idea. Or Lauren's, dressed up as Michael's idea, which by that point in the timeline I'd started assuming was true of most things that came out of my son's mouth involving his wife. He called on a Tuesday, 11 days after Helen filed the dispute, sounding like like a man who had no idea his wife's name was sitting in a bank's fraud case file 3 floors above a teller line. "I want to take you both to dinner for Mother's Day," he said. "Somewhere nice." Lauren picked a place downtown. And here's the part I've thought about more than almost anything else in this entire mess. I said yes immediately, not because I'd forgiven anything, and not because I thought a nice dinner might smooth things over. I said yes because Carol had told me on our last call that the account freeze was scheduled to go into effect that Monday, 2 days after the dinner, once the bank's internal review closed out. And I wanted, very badly, to look Lauren in the eye one more time before that freeze hit and see what she did with the last few days she didn't yet know she had left. The restaurant was the kind of place with cloth napkins folded into shapes and a wine list heavier than the menu. Lauren had picked it, Michael said, as a treat. I remember thinking, sitting down, that $31,000 buys a lot of treats when it isn't your money funding them. I had the folder in my jacket pocket before we left the house. Ray's report, the signature comparisons, copies of all 4 transfer authorizations, the paperwork on the second account with the P.O. box address. Everything organized by date, exactly the way I used to build a due diligence file before closing on a property. Nothing left to interpretation, nothing that could be argued with later. Diane had told me, half as advice and half as a joke, I don't think she fully meant as a joke. If you're going to be in the same room as her before the freeze hits, for God's sake, don't say anything you can't back up on paper. I hadn't planned to use the folder at dinner. I told myself I was bringing it because I'd been carrying it everywhere for 2 weeks, and it felt wrong to leave it behind. I think some part of me knew better. I watched Lauren the entire meal, the way I used to watch the other side of a negotiating table for the half-second tells that mattered more than anything anyone actually said out loud. She ordered a glass of wine she didn't need, and then a second one before the entrees even arrived. She checked her phone under the table 3 separate times, angling it away from Michael each time, which told me something about who she was and wasn't hiding things from these days. When Helen mentioned gently wanting to host a family barbecue in June, I watched something flicker across Lauren's face that had nothing to do with barbecues. A quick private calculation. The look of someone doing math about how much more oversight a summer of family gatherings might mean. Then Helen asked, still gentle, still entirely without accusation, whether Lauren could pull up her account sometime so she could double-check a balance before summer. "Just curious," she said. Nothing more than that. Lauren's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "It's fine, Helen. I've got it handled." "I know you do. I just like to see the numbers myself sometimes. There's nothing to see. It's all normal." She said it too fast, too smooth, like she'd rehearsed the sentence in the car on the way over, just in case the subject came up. Michael didn't notice any of it. He was refilling his own wine glass, entirely elsewhere, a man attending his own family dinner from somewhere several rooms away. I noticed everything. I'd spent 38 years being paid, essentially, to notice everything, and every instinct that job ever trained into me was screaming by the time the check arrived. Then the check came. "We're not paying for her." Lauren said it to the waiter, loud enough for the table beside us to go quiet. Loud enough that I saw the busboy hesitate 2 stations away. She meant my wife. Helen's fork stopped in the air. Michael looked at his plate, looked at the unfinished salmon he'd ordered and barely touched, looked at anything that wasn't his mother's face. Then he nodded. I want to say I felt shock. I didn't. I felt something closer to confirmation. The specific, sick feeling of watching a suspicion you've been carrying for 2 weeks solidify into a fact in real time. My son had just agreed, without a word, to humiliate his own mother in public over a $40 piece of salmon on the one day of the year built around honoring her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just kept eating. Because I understood, watching Lauren lean back in her chair with the particular satisfaction of someone who believes she's just won something, that this sentence had never really been about the check. It was a test. She'd spent a year quietly draining my wife's trust, and now she was testing, in public, with an audience, exactly how far she could push before anyone pushed back, and nobody had. Not Helen, too stunned and too well-mannered to make a scene. Not Michael, who'd already answered the test with a nod before it was fully asked. "This is getting emotional," Lauren said, rolling her eyes at Helen's silence, reaching for her wine. "Can we not?" That was when I set my fork down. "You're right," I said. "Let's not make this emotional." I reached into my jacket. "Let's make it factual instead." I set the folder on the table directly in front of Lauren and opened it to the first page, the side-by-side signature comparison Ray had prepared. Helen's real signature and the forged one printed one above the other. The missing flourish circled in red pen 4 separate times. Lauren's face went white before she'd read a single word of the report underneath it. "What is this?" she said. Not a question. A statement dressed up as one. The way people talk when they already know the answer and are stalling for the half-second it takes to build a response. "That's a forensic document examiner's report," I said. 22 years certified. He says the signature on all 4 of these transfer authorizations was forged. Practiced, not rushed. Same hesitation marks every time. Below that is a full statement history showing $31,000 moved out of Helen's account over 5 months. All of it routed through an external account that got added the same week you set up her online banking. And under that is the paperwork for a second account, opened in Helen's name, her social security number, with the mailing address changed to a P.O. box so she'd never see a single statement. Michael's face had gone somewhere I'd never seen it go. Not once in 34 years. He picked up the report with both hands hands like it might dissolve if he moved too fast, and I watched him actually read it, really read it, for the first time all evening. Lauren, his voice cracked on the second syllable of her name. What is this? I can explain the P.O. box, I said. Explain why my wife's mail started going somewhere she's never lived. Explain the 4 withdrawal forms, with a signature that isn't hers, practiced enough that it took a certified examiner to catch it wasn't. I'd genuinely like to hear it. She didn't have an explanation. She had the beginning of several sentences, none of which she finished, and the particular kind of silence that follows when a person realizes, in real time, that every version of events they'd prepared has just become unusable. It was the restaurant manager, of all people, who ended up delivering the line I still think about more than almost anything I said myself that night. He'd approached with the check, an older man, gray at the temples, the kind of quiet authority you only get from decades of managing a dining room full of other people's worst moments. And he must have caught enough of the conversation standing there, folder open, Lauren white-faced, Michael holding a forensic report like it was made of glass. He set the check down, looked at Lauren, then at Helen, then back at the table generally. Ma'am, he said, given what I'm hearing, I don't think tonight is the night to worry about who's covering the bill. This one's on the house. Take whatever time you need. He walked away before anyone could respond. I don't know if he understood the full weight of what he'd just witnessed, or just recognized enough, a family unraveling in real time over a folder of papers, to want no part of charging anyone for it. But something about a stranger extending Helen more grace in that moment than her own daughter-in-law had all evening seemed to land on both Michael and Lauren at once, in a way none of my documentation had quite managed to on its own. Lauren stood up first, said something about needing air, left the folder on the table, untouched past the first page, and didn't come back before we did. Michael stayed. He apologized to his mother. Really apologized, not the deflecting kind. In a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager who'd wrecked the car and had to explain it to us both. He said he hadn't known. I believe mostly that he hadn't known the specifics. The forged signature, the second account, the P.O. box. I believe considerably less that he'd never noticed anything worth asking about in a year of watching his wife manage his mother's finances with an enthusiasm that outpaced any reasonable definition of helpfulness. The following Monday, exactly as Carol Ibsen had told me it would, Meridian Trust froze both accounts pending their internal fraud review. 2 weeks after that, the bank's investigation confirmed everything our own documentation had already shown, and the case was referred to the county's financial crimes unit. A detective named Renata Vasquez, 14 years with the department, the last 6 specifically in financial crimes, took over from there, and Priya's forensic accounting report, along with Ray's document examination, became the backbone of a case that Diane described, with the closest thing to satisfaction I ever heard in her voice, as about as clean as these ever come. Lauren was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery. She retained her own attorney, entered a plea agreement rather than take it to trial, and was ordered to pay full restitution, the $31,000 plus interest, alongside a suspended sentence contingent on probation, and the restitution being paid in full. She lost her job within a month. Word travels fast in a field built on trust with other people's money, and a forgery conviction is not the kind of detail a wealth consulting firm quietly overlooks. Michael and Lauren separated 4 months later. I don't know all the details of what happened in their marriage after that dinner, and I've made a point of not asking for more than Michael volunteers. What I do know is that he moved out of their condo, filed for divorce in the fall, and started coming to Sunday dinners alone, quieter than he used to be, but present in a way he hadn't managed to be at that table in months. Helen got the restitution money back in full, paid out over 11 months per the court-ordered schedule, the last installment clearing 4 days before this past Christmas. She still directs her Tuesday night alumni choir group. She still checks her balance about once a month, though she does it herself now, on her own phone, with a password only she knows, something I've noticed without ever mentioning it to her, because some changes a person needs to make quietly, on their own terms, without an audience noting the significance out loud. She doesn't talk about that Mother's Day much. When it comes up, and it does occasionally, when Michael brings a girlfriend around now and someone new to the family asks an innocent question about how everyone knows each other, Helen tends to give the short version and change the subject within a sentence or two. I've stopped trying to draw more out of her than that. Some things don't need to be relived for anyone's benefit but the person who lived them. I still have the folder. Not the original. That went into an evidence file with Detective Vasquez's department and eventually the county prosecutor's office. But a copy, in a drawer in my office, the one I locked back when this whole thing started with a single missing transfer, that Helen almost laughed off as a fee. I don't know exactly why I kept it. I think, if I'm honest, it's the same reason I used to keep certain due diligence files long after a deal closed. Not because I needed them anymore. Because I wanted proof somewhere that I hadn't imagined how bad it almost got, and how close we came to never knowing.